And so this morning, Daniel and Kathy and Bryn join us, and they would like to share a little bit about what it is meant to be prayed for, prayed over, and what God has done. So we welcome you guys up this morning to give testimony.
Hi, folks.
Hello.
Thanks for having us here. I really want to take a few minutes and share a bit of my story and Kathy's story and Bryn's as far as what we went through. And to start by thanking you so much for prayer. This is really about faith, the power of prayer in our Lord. So, if you'll bear with me a second, I've got some notes. To compress this all is kind of difficult, but I don't want to take much time.
He's never done anything in 10 minutes.
No, it's true. So about 7 years ago, I had a dissection of the ascending aorta, which comes off the top of your heart, which is really dangerous. The aorta is ready to burst at that time. Michael and I were working together at that time, and he rushed me over to Mercy in Walworth, where they discovered I had this dissection, and then they raced to Janesville in an ambulance, where there was a thoracic surgery team waiting for me in the hallway, so I knew I was in trouble. The surgery was a success. Many of you were likely in the congregation at that time, if not most, and prayed for me at that time, and everything was successful. Took a couple of years to really fully recover. But thanks to God and prayer, I did recover at that time. And they suspected there might be other problems that were possibly congenital or familial. And about 2 years later, it was confirmed because my sister, at the same age I was, had the same thing happen to her. And her surgery was also successful to repair her aorta and replace it. So then they monitored me thereafter, and every 6 months or so I'd have a scan and discovered that in fact I did have further problems that again were inherited or familial, as I'd say. In my descending aorta, which is everything from up here all the way down to your kidneys in the thoracic section. And they knew I'd have to have surgery at some point in time. Enter COVID. And there were delays. But when Kathy and I went to Janesville, I knew I had to meet with our previous surgeon. And we walked in, and the first thing I said was thank you so much for saving my life 4 years ago at that time. And he looked at me and Kathy and said, I can't save your life this time. And there was a pause. And he said, but I think I know who can. And so he made a phone call to Madison and came back with a smile on his face, and he said, well, I do know who can, and he's going to take your case. I was afraid he retired because he's 70, at that time he was 72, I think, my age actually. But he did take the case, and I knew I was in good hands because my surgeon said, I'd love to be there and watch he and his team perform this surgery, which told me everything I needed to know about being in good hands that way, on top of being in God's hands. So, anyway, they delayed the surgery. They weren't concerned. It wasn't an emergency like the first time. At least it was planned. And on June 2nd last year, I had the surgery. The surgery was successful. Your congregation prayed for me the whole time and since. And it was, while the surgery was successful, there was a complication. And that was through the heart-lung bypass machine that you're on. And of course, I was on it for the second time in my life, where they bypass the heart to feed your brain and your organs. But there was a rip and a heart bleed, and then subsequently a heart attack that led to fluid on the lungs. Long story short, it landed me in ICU for close to 3 weeks. And I was on a breathing tube and a feeding tube. I was not able to breathe. It's like drowning and pretty horrific. And boy, did I have empathy for those folks that have had COVID that are on breathing tubes. It's, before having it happen, it's unimaginable what it's like. But anyway, Kathy would come up and see me. My dear wife, Kathy, would come up and see me, and she deserved an Oscar because she'd lie to me and tell me how I was doing just fine. I wasn't doing just fine at all. In fact, the second day, they told her, thankfully I didn't learn this stuff till after I was home, but they said they thought I had kidney failure. Now, mind you, even before my surgery, there was high odds, 20% of kidney failure, 30% chance of paraplegia, 25% chance of severe stroke. This was a very difficult surgery with a lot of risk. But I knew that, and I knew I was in good hands. So Kathy would come up and stroke my head and comfort me and lie to me. And at the same time, my surgeon would come in, who's my age, mind you, and his wife actually was the anesthesiologist, but he would come in what seemed like every day, but at least every other day, with his net on, and he'd touch the back of my hand and say, "Hang in there, big guy, you'll make it." So I had all your prayers, and then the comfort and attention of my wife and my surgeon to make it through this. But I was in bad shape. And near the end of the 3-week time, I failed a number of breathing tests, and they told Kathy this was bad. Actually, I should back up a little bit and tell you that the third day I was in, there were nurses that came into the room and told Kathy, "He's not responsive." And they were deeply concerned. So Kathy whispered in my ear, "Would you like some music?" And I nodded a little bit, she says. And she put on Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And all of a sudden, my hands were going back and forth like an orchestra conductor, and my feet as well, in sync. And she was kind enough or unkind enough to take a video of that, which I have. So I'll get to that, but music was a big part of my healing. Maybe not for everyone, but for me it was big. Music and prayer. But anyway, near the tail end, they, out of desperation, they said, "We've got to do a tracheotomy so he can breathe." So the next day they scheduled a tracheotomy, which is, of course, opening up the windpipe so I could breathe. And I knew it was going to happen. But Kathy got a call. She can tell you her side of this, but she got a call at 10:30 that evening, and by a nurse who was crying. That's not the call you want from a hospital. But she got that call, and the nurse was crying and said, "No need to come up tomorrow for the surgery. The breathing tube is out, and he's breathing on his own." Well, the very tender part of this, and hard to believe, is that I remember laying across a lap, almost like an infant, and being stroked, comforted, and all of a sudden having deep breaths. And it was pretty amazing. And I also saw the face of an angel. And she said, it was a female face, kind of glowing and hard to describe, but she said, "My name is V. Remember me." Well, Kathy, actually, only a few months ago told me that I talked to her on the phone that night. I don't remember that. But the next day when she came up, needless to say, it was a pretty joyous occasion. But the breathing tube was a big, a rigid thing that goes into your mouth and then takes a right angle and goes down your throat about 10 inches. And at that time, when it was taken out, I couldn't lift my arms. I had lost 40 pounds. There was no way I took the breathing tube out. And the nurses didn't take it out. So one can draw their own conclusions, but we know who took it out. And that's basically my experience that I wanted to share. And the power of prayer to me is profound. And I thank you all so much. At that time, I went to a regular room for about a week to try and regain some strength and get in a position where I was eventually transferred to a rehab facility, wonderful place in Madison, where I basically was taught to walk and breathe again. I couldn't walk 10 feet across my room without kind of slamming down in a wheelchair and gasping like an old dog. But they did a wonderful job turning that around, and 3 weeks later I was home. So Kathy reminds me that on top of the power of prayer, it's so important to be a half-full person, not a half-empty person. I've always been that. And it was very hard when I was laying there unable to breathe. But I would pray, and I did know others were praying for me all over, and especially your congregation. Kathy would remind me of it constantly. I was so worried about her driving back and forth because she'd work all day and then come up, and she'd look tired, and I couldn't talk because I was all tubed up. But I'd try and write down, be careful, drive safe. And she couldn't even read my writing. But anyway, that's my experience. I'll turn this over to my wife, but thank you so much again for all your prayers.
Maybe I should have talked when he talked. Is this on? Can you hear me? Because I could have filled in the little gaps. But everybody needs an advocate. And of course I was his. And my friends were my advocates. Calling me all the time, texting me. Texting was the way we communicated because that was easiest for me. But there's some things I'd like to share. God is good. God is great. People in the medical field have their own mindset, which hopefully includes God. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And I know they're doing their job, but I had to be Daniel's advocate. And when they told me the many, many times, he's probably not going to make it. You know that, don't you? They would call me into the waiting room before going into the ICU, and there'd be a different nurse or whatever, doctor, and they would tell me that. And I'd say, I had a mask on, which was good because I was gritting my teeth when they would say this to me. And I would say, I have faith. I have faith. I never cried once. I would cry on the way up in the car. I would cry on the way back. I listened to a recording of Psalm 91 that someone I work with sent to me in a text and told me that one day we're going to see him walking back into the factory and he's going to be fine. I would play that thing. I can't sing, but I sang as loud as I could every day when I would go up there and back. And I'd walk into the parking lot, into the hospital, asking God to help me and be with me. And then I would get in there and tell him that he was doing really great, even though they were telling me he was not. When the heart failure doctors came in with their name tags on, I could see them coming. He didn't have his glasses on. I would stop them at the door, and I'd take their tag, and I'd turn it around, and I'd say, he does not know. We are not telling him. I figured he had enough going on. He didn't need to know that he had had a heart attack. And his family knew, and Gail Mielek knew. Nobody else knew, because I couldn't handle. All of you were so great to me and for me. At that time, I thought, oh my gosh, I can't give them something else to worry about. I have to do this. I think they thought I was a little crazy because they would say, he's not going to make it. And I'd say, I have faith. He's going to make it. I have faith he's going to make it. The next day, like I said, it'd be a different nurse. Same thing, same thing. Finally, one of the doctors, a female doctor, which I want to go back up and see her. She said to me, I don't think you realize he's the sickest person here. And I looked at her and I said, that doesn't matter. I have faith. And I also knew that wasn't true because I had met a woman in the waiting room for the ICU, and she told me her brother had been shot in the neck and that they were going to be harvesting his organs the next day. So that wasn't true. He wasn't the sickest person there. But anyway, what kept me together was I would make crosses on his body. I'd sit on the edge of the bed, he wasn't responding, and I would make little crosses on his body, on his heart, on his arm, on his hand. His feet were this big around. The edema was incredible, and I would rub his legs thinking that I was helping. And one of the doctors told me, yeah, that is a good thing. Massage therapy is a good thing. And I'd make crosses. When they'd come in to tell me things about him, I would make crosses on the bed, crosses on the monitor. They thought I was nuts, but I knew I wasn't. I knew I wasn't. Now, Daniel is not a real vivacious, let's go out and golf guy. And I think your personality has a lot to do with your recovery. And they were telling me, he's not responding. Well, because he's kind of a laid-back guy. But he told you about the music part, and that really did happen, and I did video it because I wanted to show the nurses that would come in and say, all right, Daniel, pick up your right leg. He wouldn't do it. Pick up your right leg. He wouldn't do it. And then they'd leave the room. And they'd write on a chart that he hadn't responded. No response, no response. And I knew he could do it, so I recorded it. And boy, I showed that recording to everybody on my phone. All the nurses, all the doctors, look, he's responded to the music. This is working. And we got through it. But I really feel making those signs of the cross on him and everywhere I could was powerful, very, very powerful. I have never done that before, and it just seemed like the thing to do. I felt like God was leading me through this whole thing. Our daughter was home. They only allowed one person in the hospital with him, and I felt it was ridiculous for her to go up because I'm his advocate. They're telling me things and whatever. So in a 24-hour period, only one person could go. So I chose to be that one person, which I felt bad for her because she hadn't talked to her dad in 2 weeks until the night that the miracle happened, and I truly, truly believe that. Daniel could not raise his arms. That mask or that breathing tube respirator was taped onto his face and a big strap around his head. He could not raise his hands. There was an intervention. I mean, there definitely was an intervention. I'm sleeping. At that night, I'm praying, okay, what's going to happen tomorrow? They told me they had to do the tracheotomy because he would get an infection and then that could take him. So I'm like, okay, well, got to do what you got to do. When the nurse called me that night, she said, hi, Kathy, this is Shannon. Everything's okay. And she was laughing and crying. And I said, well, what? And she told me exactly what Daniel said happened. And she said, I said, how could this be? And I actually sat up out of bed because I thought maybe I'm dreaming. How could this be? And she said, I've seen it a few times before, and yes, I feel it was an intervention too. So it's like, yes, you're on my side. So we went up there, and actually I took the phone out into the living room because Bryn was still awake. And I said, I was crying, and she said, Mom, is everything okay? I said, yes, everything's great. Do you want to talk to your dad? And she just about fell off the couch. So she talked to him after not seeing and hearing from him in 2 weeks. So that was great. And she was my support. I mean, I'm so happy that she moved home from this city and was able to be with me because I couldn't have done this alone. I just couldn't have. I mean, I had her there as my strength, my power, and that was really wonderful. I feel like I'm forgetting something. What am I forgetting? The heart failure people, I hate that they have tags that say that, heart failure. I mean, what does that say to what does the patient think when they read that? You know, I mean, oh my gosh. So anyway, I don't know. Did I forget anything? We've come a long way. And thank you to my friends. Thank you. This one right here was on the phone with me every day, either texting or calling. This one was. Yeah, I looked forward to that. I really did. But I didn't have time for everybody, so I would do multiple texts and shoot them out. Multiple texts and shoot them out to his family and friends. But God is powerful. Don't ever think he's not. And thank all of you, I do, for all your prayers and support. And Karen, where's Karen? There you are, Karen. That was really, really lovely of you to put that card together. It was very, very nice. We really appreciate that. He was in the car when he got it. Michael gave it to him, and he just started crying. It was very sweet of you. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.